You probably told a small lie today. Maybe you said you were on your way when you hadn't left yet. Maybe you said you loved a gift you didn't. Small lies. Harmless lies. But in 1925, one man looked at the most famous landmark in the world and told a lie so enormous that it still doesn't seem real. He sold the Eiffel Tower. Then he sold it again. This isn't a story about a tower. It's a story about you, about how your brain decides who to trust, and how easily that decision can be hijacked by someone who understands you better than you understand yourself. His name was Victor Lustig. And to understand what he did, you first have to understand what your brain is actually built to do. Your brain did not evolve in a world of strangers. For most of human history, you lived in small groups. 50 people. 100, maybe. You knew almost everyone you'd ever meet. Trust wasn't a leap. It was a given. If someone spoke with authority, dressed like someone important, carried themselves like they belonged, your brain had a simple shortcut. Status looks like status. Confidence looks like competence. That shortcut kept your ancestors alive. It helped them know who to follow, who to listen to, who to hand their spear to during a hunt. But shortcuts can be exploited. And nobody in history exploited that shortcut better than Victor Lustig. In the spring of 1925, Lustig was staying at the Hôtel de Crillon in Paris. He read a newspaper article complaining about the cost of maintaining the Eiffel Tower. Built in 1889, it had only ever been meant to stand for 20 years. By the 1920s, the city was still paying to repaint and repair a structure many Parisians considered an eyesore. Most people read that article and moved on with their day. Lustig read it and saw an opportunity nobody else could see. Here's the part your brain wants to reject. He didn't hide from authority. He became the authority. Lustig had forged government stationery made to look like it came from the French Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He used it to invite 6 of the city's top scrap metal dealers to a confidential meeting at the Crillon, the same hotel where actual government business was often conducted. Location matters more than you think. A conversation that happens in a luxury hotel suite feels different from the exact same conversation happening in a parking lot. Your brain reads the room before it reads the person. At the meeting, Lustig introduced himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry. He told the dealers in hushed and regretful tones that the tower had become too expensive to maintain and too controversial to keep standing. The government wanted it dismantled and sold as scrap metal. But there was a catch. This had to remain secret. Public backlash would be fierce if word got out before the decision was finalized. He swore them to confidentiality and asked for their sealed bids. Notice what he did there. He didn't just lie. He turned the lie into something exclusive, something forbidden. Psychologist Robert Cialdini has spent decades studying why people comply with requests, and one of the core principles he identified is scarcity. Not scarcity of objects, scarcity of information. When something feels secret, feels limited, feels like insider knowledge, your guard drops instead of rising. You don't think, why is this a secret? You think, I'm one of the few people trusted with this. One of the dealers, a man named André Poisson, wanted this to be real more than the others did. He was newer to Paris's business elite. Being handed a secret deal by a government official wasn't just a transaction to him. It was proof that he belonged. Lustig noticed this. And here's the twist that separates an average con man from a legendary one. When Poisson seemed hesitant, Lustig didn't push harder. He pulled back. He hinted, almost apologetically, that a government salary didn't pay what it should, and that certain considerations might smooth the bureaucratic process along. In other words, he asked for a bribe. Why would that convince Poisson the whole thing was real? Because a corrupt official is more believable than a saintly one. You don't expect government business to be clean. A demand for a bribe didn't feel like a red flag. It felt like confirmation. This is the con's real engine. Lustig didn't just lie about the tower. He built a scenario where the small, ugly, believable detail made the enormous, impossible lie feel true. Poisson paid. He handed over the money for the scrap rights to the Eiffel Tower, plus the bribe, and Lustig disappeared to Vienna with the cash. Poisson was too embarrassed to go to the police. Admitting he'd been conned meant admitting he'd tried to bribe a government official for a secretly acquired landmark. Shame kept him silent. And silence is the only currency a con man actually needs. Here's where the story should end. A brilliant, one-time scam, pulled off by a man with unmatched nerve. But Lustig did something almost nobody expects. He came back to Paris. He found new scrap dealers. He ran the exact same scam a second time. This is the detail that breaks people's intuition about deception. You'd assume the smart move is to disappear forever. Take the win. Vanish into obscurity. But research on confidence artists, documented extensively by journalist and psychologist Maria Konnikova in her study of scam psychology, points to something counterintuitive. The people most vulnerable to a second con are often the ones who narrowly avoided embarrassment the first time. Lustig understood that shame silences victims more effectively than fear does. He wasn't gambling on getting away with it twice. He was relying on human psychology to protect him. The second attempt didn't land as cleanly. That buyer went to the police. Lustig fled to the United States, where his story only grew stranger. He would go on to sell a fake money printing box to investors, a device he claimed could duplicate $100 bills. It couldn't. He was eventually arrested not for the Eiffel Tower scheme, but for counterfeiting currency, and he died in Alcatraz in 1947, a man who spent his life manufacturing trust in a place built entirely around the absence of it. Why does this story still grip people a century later? Because it isn't really about Lustig. It's about a mirror. You like to think you'd never fall for something like this. But sociologist Irving Goffman spent his career studying something he called impression management, the idea that all social life is a kind of performance, and that people constantly read costume, setting, and confidence as evidence of truth before they ever examine the facts. You do this too. Every day. You trust the doctor in the white coat more than the one in street clothes. You trust the email with the official-looking logo more than the one without. You trust the person who speaks first, speaks calmly, and seems to already know the answer. None of this makes you gullible. It makes you human. Your ancestors needed that shortcut to survive in small, trusting communities. The tragedy isn't that the shortcut exists. The tragedy is that the modern world is full of strangers who've learned exactly how to trigger it. Think about the last time you clicked on a link because the sender's name looked official. Think about the last time you believed a stranger's confidence over your own doubt. That flicker of hesitation you feel right before you hand over trust, that's not weakness. That's your brain running the same ancient calculation Poisson's brain ran in a hotel suite in 1925. Status looks like status. Confidence looks like competence. And somewhere, someone always knows exactly how to look like both. So tonight, when you get an email that feels a little too official, or a message that feels a little too urgent, remember the tower that got sold twice. Not because the story is unbelievable, but because, given the right hotel room, the right stationery, and the right kind of confidence, you might have signed the check too.